What's up, everyone? This is Show Money episode 2, or as the 90s child in me likes to say, the next episode. You can see that you're coming from my messed up office because I've just moved, so bear with me there. This is Paul Gift from Bloody Elbow, back with you again, and we have John Nash from Bloody Elbow and Jason Cruz from MMA Payout. Today we're going to talk about drug testing, boxing with Mayweather, Pacquiao, and Premier. What in the world are they called? What am I missing?
Premier Boxing Championship.
I want to say Fighting Championship for some reason. Premier FC. I have no idea why. And give an update on the UFC antitrust lawsuit. All right. So with that, Jason, you want to get us started with drug testing?
Yep. So on February 18th, the UFC put together a news conference where it essentially said it was the last straw and indicated it would have a call to action, which basically said on July 1st of this year they would have enhanced drug testing. And among the things they talked about was basically out-of-competition drug testing. Also seeking stiffer penalties for people that do violate their drug policies, as well as seeking to go with a third-party vendor to oversee the drug testing that they want to initiate. Obviously, this is in relation to the spate of drug failures. In 2015, the big one highlighted by Anderson Silva and his failed drug test from this past February. This past February's pay-per-view. So I guess I'll bring it up to you guys. As far as the UFC's stake in drug testing, how do you think it will go as far as implementation? We'll go with whoever wants to jump in.
John, go ahead.
It'll be interesting. I mean, I'm all for it. I find it. You guys hearing me?
Yeah.
So, okay, good. I thought I hit my mic off on accident for a second ago. I'm all for it. I think it's kind of long. I mean, just for pure cosmetic reasons, they had, I think, implement it. The sport, so many failed tests make it look. Make the sport look really dirty. You know, it really is. I think it was a negative image for a lot of people. It looks like a roided out sport. So I think that's a positive. It's something they had to do. I got a lot of crap the first day it was announced, and I voiced a minor complaint, and everybody thought I was against it, which was that my one complaint and one really big issue with it, of implementing it, is I guess what the UFC is going to have to alter their contracts apparently to have some sort of authority over fighters that fail. To have them be able to implement some sort of punishment if they go outside of the commissions to do this. And my one complaint, or was one question that I thought the media should be asking, is what sort of authority and changes to the contracts would have to be implemented for the UFC. I mean, the fighters already give up a lot of rights, already have a piece of paper on their desk on their locker every time they show up to a fight to sign some new right away. That's my one issue. But besides that, I think it's a smart move. I guess my other issue is it's almost like the Reebok deal. We know very little about how it's going to be implemented yet, besides the basics. That there might be a random testing, might be through WADA, that it might include 2-year bans if possible, but they have to get Nevada on board because they're obviously going to want some sort of athletic commission to be the body that that takes the brunt of the blame that they follow. So with that said, I find it interesting, but I also don't know much about it, so I don't quite have that much of an opinion about it yet. Paul, your thoughts?
Well, when you said the UFC has to change their contracts, I need to go back and review part of the contracts, but you're not talking about the punishment part, right? Because that's still supposed to be the athletic commission, and I believe that the UFC is just lobbying for higher penalties, right? Well, but you're talking about in terms of bringing WADA in or someone like them.
Yeah, well, if the UFC is going to implement testing themselves and use a third party and not the commissions, they have to have some right in their contract that they can actually, suspend fighters themselves without the athletic commissions doing it.
I don't think they're going to suspend fighters themselves. It sounds like they're still going to rely on the athletic commissions, but I thought you were talking about just saying that we're going to go test you and it's not a commission test, that needs to be in the contract. Is that
no, I'm more thinking about if they test you through a random testing procedure through WADA, and it's not the commissions, and the athletic commissions don't have authority over you unless you've signed a license in that state, then the athletic commissions
we'll
can't
find out
suspend
soon.
you. Yeah, then the athletic commissions can't suspend you. So, and the athletic commissions can't suspend you, and you fail your drug test, and there's a rule that says you get a 2-year suspension. Well, the UFC is going to need authority of some sort to be able to do that.
Right, yeah. And when you have no fight, total random out of competition ones with no fight
And
plan.
so my question then, who's responsible for arbitration? What kind of arbitration? Yeah. I mean, there's not like there's some, collective bargaining association sitting down with them to debate over the merits of how it's going to be.
Yeah. So go ahead, Jason.
Okay, I think that you guys hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of moving parts here that the UFC will have to set in place before July 1st. And I think one of the things that they're going to find a lot of issue with is working with the commissions. And they have certain set of rules in place. And, you heard at the press conference that, the UFC is all for, bigger bans, like with 4 years that they were for first-time offenders that they were seemingly behind. The issue being also as John points out, is the contract is that they're going to have to amend everybody's contract. And when you do these things, when you amend these contracts to say, hey, you're going to have to submit to USADA, VADA, or whatever. You're going and it being out of competition, you're going to be submitting or allowing a lot of your privacy to be gone, because if they're going to be allowed to visit you when you're on vacation or wherever you're at, you're going to have to tell the person, the UFC or the independent body where you're at. So you're giving up a lot of privacy as well as to where you're at. So and it also kind of circles back to even that independent contractor issue we talked about last time out, where we're talking about retention of control and how much control can a contracted party have over independent contractors. So there's a lot of moving parts, and I'm not sure if the UFC I don't know if they can set it all in place by July.
Yeah, I think part of it is I think the UFC part of it they almost were compelled in this. I don't think it's fully thought out, fully meshed, or a fully formed idea yet. They leapt on this because of all the bad news after all the failed tests. They jumped into it. At the same time, I understand and I kind of applaud the UFC for what they're doing, and I don't even know if they really want to do this themselves. They just feel they have to do it, and so I have some sympathy with them for. I have a lot of, maybe some criticisms or I have some doubts of how it's going to go, but I have a lot of sympathy at the same time because I think this is something that they view and a lot of people view as a necessity of drug testing, and they're almost being dragged and being responsible for this themselves, even if they don't want all that responsibility.
Yeah. I mean, this was an interesting case for me, like the economist in me, right? Because you've got this league that has the ability. All other leagues pretty much self-regulate. And then you've got this league or association, whatever you want to call them, promotion that essentially had the ability to free ride on the government for years and years and years, and just sort of let the government do it for them, deflect any excuses of the government. And then I totally agree with you, right? Someone like Anderson Silva pops, and all of a sudden you almost have to do this. The thing that I really liked hearing in the announcement was talk of risk of reward, right? People finally bringing in the fact that the benefits of doing this, whether real or not, I'm sure the benefits to the fighters, perceived benefits, were huge. Again, their perceptions, it might not be the truth, but versus the cost, which was minimal fine and like 6 months, 9 months, right? I loved hearing that. The other great thing that came out of this with those numbers that they gave us is finally showing us some data on how ridiculous in competition testing is, right? 900 in competition tests over the last year or two, and 12 people popped for PEDs versus 19 out of competition and 5.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yes, and even the out of competition, that's not consistent. Out of competition might be 1 test, might be 2, might be 3, and that's only after someone's been licensed. We're not talking about we're not talking about without a bout being scheduled. We're not talking about the middle of a summer when they're not booked at all.
Right.
Testing too. How many people would fail for that?
Right. Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. So I love seeing movement towards more thorough out of competition testing. And some people talked about nervousness or fear that it might kill a main event at the last second, really big card. Yeah. But one of the things I would do is take this idea of in-competition testing, how few people fail, and one thing you could do, right, if you're really worried about your main event getting knocked off, you do your randomized out-of-competition stuff, but tell the main eventers, in the last month before this card, we're going to test you 3 times. Like, you know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Don't
or at
use,
least 3
or
times.
you're gonna pop, and don't ruin our card at the last minute. Maybe some idiot will do it, but you'll probably get rid of a lot of those types of failures.
Actually, one idea a couple fighters, I shouldn't say a lot, I think it was 3 different guys gave me, and is they would like to see TRT exemptions brought back, but for guys coming off injuries, and that you could get a TRT, a TUE, to recover, and then only after you're off, after you've recovered, and then you had to wait a certain period of time, then only then could you be booked to fight, because they think it's just the nature of the sport. You're asking a lot of older fighters, or anybody getting over 30, you're asking a lot of them to come back from an injury. They're using Silva as the example, come back from an injury without doing something. And you're in other words, without some sort of loophole, you are not going to get you're going to have a lot less fights from these guys in the future.
Yeah, maybe that. Man, that seems
no one will go for that. I doubt they'll go for
that. So let me ask another question here regarding the drug testing. I recall that the UFC was looking into this in August, and they had actually way back in last April. They were doing blood and urine at the Glover Teixeira John Jones fight back in Baltimore, and they were kind of gearing towards doing this. And in August they were talking about it, and by the time January had rolled around after the Kung Lee debacle, they kind of dropped the issue, and now here they are picking it up again. What do you see as far as the Zufra going? Who do you think that they will contract with, or what's the process that you guys think that they will go with at this particular point? It seems like they should or probably already know who is going to be their vendor.
About what third party will do the drug testing? Yeah,
whether it be USADA or VADA or one of those. They didn't want to talk about it straight out at the news conference, but they kind of inferred that we've talked to all the big bodies, so it's not going to be Joe and Tom's drug testing outfit.
Jason and John's drug testing shop
out of Laguna. So no, so I mean, as far as how do you think that would work if you say USADA came in and basically were to work with a Nevada commission that they seem to have in the past kind of butted heads? How would that seem to come to pass?
I'm actually intrigued by that, because I'm a little hesitant to. I mean, I guess not hesitant, but the UFC announced a little while ago that they're gonna muscle up the they're gonna add some weight behind the state commissions, athletic commissions. That was their plan, and now they're talking about bringing in a third party for testing, and we haven't got the details yet. Does that third party, do they overlap consistently? In other words, do the UFC plan on using third party for out of competition, and then at a certain point that third party drops out and the states take over? Do the states even do they stop testing if the UFC is doing all the testing themselves? I have questions about that. I haven't heard any details on that yet. So,
yeah, no, I guess I kind of assumed that it seemed like the athletic commission would be taking over much. Or sorry, I messed it up. That the third party drug testing agency would be taking over, and there wouldn't be a lot of overlap. But that was my assumption.
Yeah, and then what happens? What happens if someone fails the third party test but doesn't fail the state commission test?
Exactly.
Yeah. My assumption was that the results would be turned over to commission and they would do the penalties, but then that brings the issue. Yeah, when you have no contract and you have no license, who punishes you? It makes me wonder. It makes me wonder. Sorry.
I'm just wondering, do state guidelines allow them to accept third-party testing?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, does the California Athletic Commission accept? They don't accept money to do testing from the UFC. They have to do testing themselves. You're not allowed to pay for additional testing to California. They have to pay for it themselves. So would they accept the testing of a third party if you failed a week before on a random test and California didn't submit the test themselves?
Yeah. The other thing I wonder is if you're not under the purview of a state agency, does that fall into almost like international territory, right? Where the UFC is their own athletic commission. Yeah. Even though you would be in the United States, perhaps they are the athletic commission because you don't have a state athletic commission overseeing you. I wonder about that. Possibly.
Well, and that leads up to the whole reason why we're here is the Kung Lee issue, which is where they.
Oh no.
Oh no, we lost Jason at that very key moment where he had a very insightful comment.
Oh no.
No,
Jason will be back.
I'm here.
You give him like 5 seconds. He's back. Yeah. Okay. The Kung Lee issue. You're about to be very insightful. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. Well, which leads us all back to the Kung Lee issue, which is that I'm not sure if the UFC ever addressed that issue at the news conferences. Did they, if they are to act as a regulating authority, who comes into play as the body to pretty much be the jurisdiction? Where are we at that point? It just seems like again we go back to this. There's a lot of moving parts here, and will like a state commission list.
Crap.
Dang. The feed's done. I'll just interject really quick now that I got a moment. That's why I think they're going to have to use USADA or WADA, because they have to use someone that has credibility.
I was about to say the exact same thing. Like, they can't mess around anymore.
If they do someone that's, some fringe player or hodgepodge thing, like with Kung Lee, they're going to, they're ripe for lawsuits and getting ripped and, and just purely, looking comical in the process. They'll have to do someone who can bear the brunt of any blame if something goes wrong.
Exactly, and it seems like they're ready to spend some money, and that's the major thing with this is it's expense. Finding flying out or however they do it, not flying out, but finding someone to go test someone no matter where they are in the world. The major expense associated with it, but I got the impression that they're ready to deal with someone reputable now, which I think was the problem in the Kung Lee debacle, correct?
Oh yeah, and I always wonder too. So, hey, you're back. Look who's here.
We missed that second part, Jason, but I'm sure it was.
It was thoughtful and provocative, but we should move on.
Exactly. All right. We're just kind of rotating audio problems with each person every show. Next time it'll be John, I'm sure.
I'm sure. I had plenty of problems last time, so hopefully we'll get them all out this time. Well, I guess on that note, should we move on to the next subject?
All right, Premier Fighting Championships. Let's go.
Yeah, which is Premier Fighting Championships, not Pride. Premier. Which, speaking of drug testing too, what's interesting is they have drug testing too apparently on Premier Boxing Championship. If you haven't been paying attention to our sister sport of combat sport of boxing, boxing is off to a huge start this year. 2 major events have already been announced, or one's taken place and one's been announced. The long-awaited super fight, the biggest fight we've seen since De La Hoya Mayweather was announced. Floyd Mayweather will be finally fighting Manny Pacquiao May 2nd in Vegas in a colossal, monstrous fight. The biggest money fight in history, easily the biggest money fight in history, and it's been long, 5 years waiting, and even though everybody would say it's overdue, it's a bigger fight than ever. And in addition to that, boxing has also returned to network TV. Following in the footsteps of the UFC, it's finally returned to network TV. Al Heyman, super promoter, manager, none of the above advisor, has put together a promotion or an organization, not a promotion, an organization called PBC, Premier Boxing Champions, and it's returned to the NBC network Saturday for an event that did very good ratings, and will be seen on Spike coming up and CBS. So two things in the boxing world we got going on, and I guess from a economist point of view, how intriguing do you find these two moves by boxing, Paul?
Oh, extremely intriguing. I mean, well, the first one, I mean, Mayweather-Pacquiao, the amount of money that was out there, from an economist's point of view, it was astounding that it wasn't happening. You know, a lot.
But
go ahead.
Think how bigger the purse is now. Before they were talking 100 million, now they're talking a guaranteed 200 million.
Right.
200. Put that in perspective. Lorenzo Fertitta said he paid all the UFC fighters $250 million from 2005 to 2011.
Right. No, I know. So nice gamble to get a bigger purse, but what you were risking was losing along the way. So yeah, it was a nice gamble that paid off for them. Obviously, fight fans wish it happened, 4 or 5 years ago. But I can't wait. I'm gonna be out there. Cannot wait for that weekend. I start teaching class that Monday, but I'm going to be there all weekend enjoying the show. So that one, the Premier Boxing Championships, is an interesting one. And that, tell me if one of you guys know this. How is he getting around the manager-promoter issue? I know he says that there's a separate promoter, right? But then what role is Al Heyman filling there in that Premier Boxing Championships is his, I believe, or at least he's the face of it. But yet there's an outside promoter, but yet he's the manager. Anybody know about that?
Paul,
for those who don't know what I'm talking about, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, the Muhammad Ali Act doesn't let managers and promoters commingle themselves. Let's put it that way.
It's there's a firewall, specifically written into the Muhammad Ali Act that there's a firewall between a manager and a promoter. So you cannot have there's supposed to be opposing individuals in business. They can't be the same thing. He gets around it by being an advisor. Exactly. He consults with the promoters. He consults with the fighters. He puts them together, arranges stuff to make everybody happy.
Oh, so he's not even a manager.
He's technically not a manager. He's an advisor.
Oh, there we go. Done and done.
Done.
I would compare him to Worldwide West. Maybe just somebody in the behind, but everybody knows who he is. But,
yeah.
It's definitely. I know there's been a couple of lawsuits that have where Heyman has been sued, just basically alleging that he is acting as a manager promoter, even though that's not his official title. And a lot of people can say that because he's I mean, whether or not it's him, he is signing talent and away from other management companies, and he is steering them toward.
Once again.
We are snake bit. I really was intrigued by what he was going to say after that.
I know. We got to find out the root issue of it. Are you back?
Yeah, I'm back. I'll be shorter.
We lost you in steering them towards
fights and whatnot. So anyway, I'll be much shorter in my talk. So go ahead.
I really enjoyed some of his concerts back in the day, though.
Yeah, man's a smart man. Everybody I talk to talks about what a genius the guy is. So now I guess, but looking at what he's up to, he's doing supposedly, and I guess I can say I've talked to several people and they've confirmed to me off the record that he's doing time buys basically with NBC and CBS.
Right.
So he's paying. He has reportedly $100 million investment fund sitting in the bank. And he's paying, I guess, $20 million for NBC. He's paying millions for the time, and he's spending millions on the purses. A lot of people have the question what he's up to, what his eventual goal is, and I have an idea what his goal is, but from your point of view, Paul, what do you think he's up to?
What do you think? The question is, does he get sponsorship money off of there were some commercials, right? But then, do you think he's building fighters for pay-per-views? I mean.
I actually don't. A lot of people think he's building fighters for pay-per-view. There was a rumor that he was going to start his own kind of like Fight Pass, but I think he's, and again, I spent the week talking to a lot of boxing promoters and people behind the scenes. I mean, on the record, I talked to Leon Margolis and Gary Shaw and Lou DiBella and Kevin Kay, but off the record, a lot more people. And yes, I didn't talk to that person, but they almost all, a lot of people, especially people off the record, were saying they think he's trying to build up a TV property, right? In other words, he's kind of doing what the UFC has done, and he's trying to build boxing into, I guess, an NHL, a Major League Soccer, to get some sort of TV deal like that, but they expect hundreds of millions when he comes back and negotiates a new TV deal in the future.
Right. So you think he's trying to have an Ultimate Fighter moment?
Kinda. I mean, I think it's a little different in the sense that, I guess that's the genius of doing time buys, is there's no pressure. The station doesn't worry about the ratings, so he can slowly build it up, and they expect to build up better ratings with the Pacquiao-Mayweather fight coming up, as more and more people get interested in boxing with the news of boxing in here.
I seriously wonder about that strategy, or who the primary investor is in that case. If he's spending a lot of other people's money, it makes a little sense to me. I don't know if I see this as a MMA was kind of new and it was on free TV, and then we had that great fight, but then everybody knows about boxing, so I don't know. Well, if it's to build a TV property, I wonder about the strategy.
But there's no TV property for boxing. There hasn't been, I guess, is the explanation I got, is that if he can consistently show good ratings, then he can go back. I mean, look at Major League Soccer got a $90 million deal. NHL got a $250 million deal. UFC's got over a $100 million deal, and most people I talked to thought boxing would do better than UFC because it's much more acceptable to TV. It doesn't have the image of cage fighting and that sort of thing, so you could get much bigger returns on that. So with sports TV rights being so high, a lot of people think his expectation a year or two to go back and try to get a $200-300 million a year TV deal.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you there. The question to me would be, how much? I don't care about the total, right? How much per fight, essentially? How much per broadcast? How much per fight? And then what are the fighters' alternatives, right? If they're not doing that, what else could they be getting in their free HBO or not free HBO shows, but non-pay-per-view HBO shows or those sorts of things.
Well, I mean, HBO and Showtime and ESPN's total budget right now is under $100 million combined. Mm-hmm. So he'd be able to compete. If he could get that kind of money, he'd be able to compete easily, I think, with an HBO. Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I like the strategy. As someone who enjoys watching it, especially for free, I want to see it. I want to see it happen.
I think it's amazing because either it's going to be a roaring success and be amazing, or a colossal failure. It'll be amazing. Either way, no matter what, we'll get entertained. There's something amazing going to happen.
Yeah.
So, but it really is remarkable. What strikes me too is like he's totally following the playbook of the UFC, who was totally following the playbook of the WWF. It's the repeat of the combat sports, of basically getting on TV and building your name up and brand and driving your rivals out of business.
Huh. Jason?
Yeah. My question for you guys is, before I go out again, do you guys think that the strategy of having these more boxing on, do you think it'll be more sustained throughout the year? Can people hang on to watching boxing out on Spike and Showtime, HBO, and now on NBC? Do you think that there is an audience for that?
I don't know. I mean, you'd think that the once a month, they could build up fight would be bigger, but I think the plan is I'm just asking around. I think the plan is to basically oversaturate the market, just to expose so many people to boxing again. That people, people that don't tune into NBC are going to find out about it because it's on CBS or Spike. That they're just spreading it so thin to make sure they hit every possible target audience out there, and eventually they'll reel it in and go to one channel, one or two stations. But for now, they want to take advantage of that Mayweather-Pacquiao interest and just spread it thin and get people to just rediscover boxing that's on TV again.
Sorry.
One of the things that I think about boxing and the allure of it is that it does skew a little older in demos because people have grown up with it, and which would be helpful for it to be allured for advertisers like luxury brands or your male enhancement brands like a Viagra or something like that. You can see that happening because people in their 40s and 50s are more willing to watch a boxing match because they grew up, on CBS watching, Alexis Arguello or Marie Mancini, those kind of things, or an ABC, whatnot. But they grew up watching it, so I think they're much more acceptable than they would when they're watching, MMA.
Yeah, no Condom Depot commercials coming, I guess.
I think that's one thing boxing has over MMA is I think they have a much better chance of getting better sponsorship just because it is. We think UFC's got such a young target audience that obviously it's got to be more appeal. But the truth is, I think boxing is found much more acceptable by most advertisers. They're not worried about the image as much. It's been around for a long time. It has a story tradition. It doesn't have the aesthetics of a guy getting beat on the ground or in a cage. All those things going by. So if boxing can do the same ratings as the UFC, they look to make probably a bunch more in their TV deals, their license deals.
Yeah. And he's got some decent names. Maybe not absolute superstars, but good names. Yeah. I'm excited to see how it goes.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by that too. Okay, well that was our excursion into boxing away from MMA briefly. So now, Paul, back to MMA. There was some updates recently in the class action lawsuit against the UFC by a group of fighters, and you want to give us that update?
Yeah. So what was it? About a little over a week ago, fighters filed their motion, the UFC filed their motion to dismiss the antitrust lawsuit filed by the fighters, the 4 separate groups of fighters. Their cases have now been related, not completely consolidated, but related, and will probably be consolidated in a little while. And so the UFC filed their motion to dismiss, and John tipped me off to this on a Friday night. Thanks, John. And I saw the notification at 2:30 in the morning and stayed up till about 7 a.m. trying to analyze that sucker. And so basically, what the UFC is touching on is they touch on a bunch of different areas, but the reason that I thought it was so important or interesting when it happened was that it's the first time that we got to officially hear from the UFC outside of just some, blah, blah, blah public statement that will defend our business practices. And so they're not going to lay their whole argument out on the line there, but we got a taste of the types of things that they're thinking, that they might be saying. Now, some of what they were doing was just pure motion to dismiss strategy, right? But they also had to put out on the line some of the potential arguments that they're going to make. You heard a lot about, if you read the motion to dismiss, you see a lot about pro-competitive business justifications of their conduct. You see that sort of stuff. You hear about sort of likeness rights, them arguing that having likeness rights in perpetuity is a common thing and it doesn't keep fighters from other promotions. They talk about sponsors, venues, TV distributors, and whether they're being foreclosed from whether rival promotions are being foreclosed from competing with those guys. So you get a taste of the types of things that the Zuffa defense team is going to be saying. So what were you guys' first off, just what were your initial thoughts when you read through the complaint? That's kind of a broad question. So what one major thing stuck out to you after reading through, not the complaint, the motion to dismiss? What was that primary thought you were having?
Let's go with Jason, since I think we have him before we lose him again.
Yeah. So the motion to dismiss is basically the standard litigation playbook stuff. So it wasn't obviously it's kind of a way to fish people out as far as getting the plaintiffs to provide more in their case. So typically, just to back up a little bit, the 3 things that happen from here with this motion to dismiss is plaintiffs could answer it, plaintiffs could amend their complaint, or plaintiffs could dismiss and refile. They're probably not going to do the latter 2, but maybe they'll respond to the motion and seek amendment of some sort in cooperation, I guess you could say, with Zuffa. But as far as I thought that when looking at it last night, I thought the interesting part there that they went over was the the protection of their intellectual property, and when they're talking about their the right to sign their contracted fighters to these prolonged contracts, and I think in the motion to dismiss they make a analogy to, you know, we're not going to change our video games every year because someone leaves us or something of that nature. So I thought that was an interesting point, and it'll be interesting to see. And now we have a long time now because the motion isn't going to be heard till July, so we'll have a while for us to see the moving papers.
Yeah, real quick before John goes, for those who don't know, the fighters respond to it within a couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks from now, I believe, and then after that, the UFC will reply a few weeks following that.
Yeah, so it'll be very exciting stuff on that front for months on end now, as we slowly, these things move at a lightning pace. So be prepared, people. No, I mean, personally, I have not much to say on it. It's outside my expertise. I'm not an economist. I'm not a lawyer, legal speak. I just, but all I do is I call when these things happen. I send the complaint to some people I talk to that are much more informed than I do and have them go through it. One thing is they mentioned to me is they were a little disappointed. They're really impressed with the motion to transfer, a little bit disappointed in the motion to dismiss because, and me and Paul talked about this briefly off the air, and I can't get the details because it's above my pay grade, but their complaint was that the motion to dismiss, they thought, kind of missed the forest from the trees in their opinion, is that they focused on a few issues, and to them the bigger deal was the wider scope of the scheme, as they claim the UFC has, that all these elements add up together, and they thought they didn't do enough to attack that scheme. I'm not the person to say if that's true or not, but that was their opinion.
Yeah, and so my view was thinking that what they were doing was trying to flush out specificity, using this Twombly case, this Twombly precedent, to which requires plausibility, which requires plaintiffs who file these cases to make more than just sort of broad general claims, and trying to flush out a lot of this specificity to try to lock people in to something later on that could then be used against them, or to try to in certain cases, like with the venues, to actually try to set up for the judge that they really think some of this stuff is ridiculous. And I'm on record as thinking that the venue claims are pretty ridiculous. I think the fighters are toast on the venue claims. Absolutely.
On the venue one, though, it's kind of interesting. Remember, Tito said the same thing about Bellator. That the UFC blocked them from going to Anaheim for their show in San Diego, the big Bellator tentpole.
It could, perhaps. I don't know. Did they have some contract there that was exclusive?
No, that's supposedly. I mean, I don't know. It was something Tito said. And, I called other people, and apparently it happened. I don't know how it happened or what was the details, but apparently Bellator wanted to do their show in Anaheim, and the UFC blocked it. I don't know if it was a contract. They haven't been there in a while. UFC. I don't think they've been in Anaheim for a while, but supposedly the Anaheim Pond told them that we don't want to run a show here for you guys because we want to get the UFC back.
Right. So what I would suspect is going on there is Bellator probably has similar. I'm not trying to pick on Bellator. Yeah. Bellator PR. I'm not trying to pick on you. They emailed me from this past week, but they probably have similar exclusivity clauses in their contract. And if they run a Bellator show, then they're contractually forbid to run any other promotion like the UFC, would be my guess. And maybe they wanted a chance to run the UFC, so said no to Bellator. It could be something like that, possibly.
It could be. But isn't there could you do it? I guess what would be the length of time you could have exclusive agreement that wouldn't be considered restraining an arena?
It depends, but I think a lot of these were. I think they were actually had in there that a lot of these were around 6 months. I could be wrong on that. Yeah. I thought that in the complaint it had some around there, but I could be totally wrong. But
yeah, I think that's what it said.
But yeah, no. But the heart of the argument is essentially one where you've got all these good venues and you're locking them up for, let's say, 6 months or a year at a time, keeping us from having access to them. But the problem is you're trying to say the relevant market is the United States. And when you talk about a few venues on the Las Vegas Strip and have a relevant market of the United States, you're going to be absolute toast. So anyway, but that's just one aspect. But what they brought in, what you saw them doing though, was sort of setting up. Oh, we have Reebok sponsorship, but there are all these other ones out there as possibility, right? Nike, what did they bring in? Champion, all these other guys. Oh, we have this TV distributor, Fox, but there are all these other TV distributors out there, right? So you can see them setting that up. And there's pro-competitive business justifications for using this. We don't want competitors to free ride on the investments in our fighters. There's competition for the contract, that when you have an exclusive, you really want to get that exclusive, so it makes you compete more. They're setting all those arguments up for the future. That's what I sort of read into it. In addition to trying to get the plaintiffs, the fighters, to be a little bit more specific, they're kind of setting the judge up for that kind of stuff, was my main takeaway. I can't imagine this complaint wouldn't get amended somehow, but I could be wrong there. I just think somehow the fighters are going to have to be a little bit more specific, but it'll probably survive dismissal overall. But I think they'll end up adding specificity.
Yeah, I think one of the things that always happens in these types of motions is the response is that, we'll find out in the discovery. That's one of the reasons why the Twombly case kind of tried to do away with that. I mean, the difference between federal court and state court is that in state court you can speculate, and in your complaint you could say, upon information and belief, I think da-da-da-da-da. But in federal court, they've kind of shored it more up with these cases. Still, I do think that the plaintiffs will kind of come back and say, well, we could prove all this if we have access to Zuffa's information or the Zuffa emails or things of that. And I'm sure they'll point out to hey, we've been proactive in trying to subpoena Twitter and YouTube and all that. So that's what I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of fans, what they miss about the whole thing is, and everybody gets up in arms or gets excited about the complaint. They always say, oh, the complaint proves the UFC's breaking the law, or the complaint's bogus, it's going to get thrown out. The complaint is basically there to get past dismissal, to say, hey, here's a presentation of some things that Zuffa does or says that are questionable. Get us past dismissal. And the case, every actor thinks it's going to get past dismissal, but that doesn't mean, getting past dismissal doesn't mean the case is over. Doesn't mean they won, doesn't mean they lost. It just means we got to a point where the case is probably going to be decided in some sort of, some point down the line, where some sort of investigation has to go under to say, hey, are these allegations true? Are they false? This information, do we need a little more information to prove? These are complex allegations. These are not simple, that they stole money from the guys or they, gave them, crooked contracts. The allegations are quite complex. And that it takes a little more than just saying, oh, this is obviously, it's way beyond me. I have no clue. Do they do it or not? Who knows? You're going to have to investigate a little more to prove if these antitrust allegations are true or false.
Right. Did the motion to dismiss change either of you guys' thinking on the case in any way?
A little bit. I don't know. I think it cemented some thoughts about certain things I'm not 100% certain on about the allegations. And I always thought that they're going to have to narrow the relevant market to the people that were under contract at the UFC and then tried to resign, because the allegations is that the UFC is using all this leverage on them. It's the people that are under contract that are the ones being forced to sign for lesser amounts, because that's when they're using their leverage. That's the only thing, But overall, no. Again, this is your guys' world, not mine. So I don't know what it would have changed in my mind. I read it and it glosses over. My eyes gloss over, and I get a little bored, and I move on to something else.
I'm sure it does for other attorneys, as well. But it did nothing to change my mind. I thought that essentially it was standard stuff. I thought a little bit of it, and this is what we do, is that a little bit of was to answer back some of those inflammatory things that were said in the complaint, where they reserved like the last page to kind of say, hey, let's strip down all of these name-calling things about Dana holding up the RIP sign or whatnot, and let's get down to the nuts and bolts of the legal issue. It makes them look a little more pragmatic.
Oh, so close.
That was, yeah. Now it was suspense to me holding this. That was the one thing I thought the motion was good, is that they tried to they try to humanize Dana and basically throw away all those comments. I don't know, but yeah.
Jason,
Yeah.
you wanna start over or continue?
I have no idea where I went off. Basically, what I'm trying to say is one of the things that they used the motion for was to kind of answer back a lot of the issues that the plaintiffs had to say about Dana's business acumen or lack thereof. And so they use, if you'll look at the motion, which we'll post, that they kind of address some of those issues and saying, let's strip it down, all the name calling, and get to the pragmatic pragmatic law in this case. So that's kind of makes them seem more human to the court. But that's just me when I would.
Right. Now I'm my thoughts on this, right? I've worked on these things before. I expected a lot of the things they said in the motion to dismiss, but the more time goes by, the more let's assume we get by motion to dismiss, probably an amended complaint, but we get by motion to dismiss. Then we're into discovery, and let's assume that the UFC doesn't mind discovery happening, and if there's any private information, they can get it redacted so that they're not sort of compelled to settle. And let's assume we get towards summary judgment. The more time goes by, the more I think about this stuff, the more I read about this stuff, the more I think that the UFC actually has a good chance of outright winning on summary judgment. I really do. And a lot of people don't get that because they see the UFC as this dominant business in their industry. But once you start to realize the pieces that you have to put together to win this type of case, it's hard.
Jeffrey, Professor Harrison, it was Harrison or him, Harrison told me, 30 years ago, this might be a completely different case. Yes. Things have changed a lot. And the thing people miss, too, and we've talked about this before, is UFC could very well, and I personally think, if you're talking just about MMA, UFC is technically a monopoly power. They own the market that much. You add up all the business they do compared to Bellator, it's like, they do 10 times the business Bellator does. No, probably 20 times the business Bellator does. As sane as that sounds, it's probably true that they do 20 to 30 times the business that their next competitor does. That they are a monopoly power in the business, and you might even say they're a monopsony power if you're talking about for fighters. But being that doesn't mean that's illegal. That's a whole different standard.
Right.
You can have that much power.
Without giving the name of the company, I've defended a company that in their industry was more dominant than the UFC. From an average, everyday sort of Joe Schmo's way of viewing that company, like, whoa, that company is huge, like dominates their industry. And they won in summary judgment their antitrust case, got it essentially thrown out or won in summary judgment because all the pieces weren't there. The pieces that you need for this type of puzzle, for this type of story to be abusing your power weren't there. And so that's what, and they're going to have to, like you said, they're going to have to nail the relevant market, absolutely nail it. Both sides are going to be arguing something different, and the judge is going to have to go with the fighter's side. And the other major issue they're going to have, in my opinion, is this duration stuff, this contract duration. Yeah. There's going to be a lot of arguments, right, over the verbiage of the contracts and how they're enforced. But that you can see the UFC hinting, the Zuffa people hinting at it in their motion to dismiss, that they see a duration. They also brought up competition for fighters before they joined the UFC, so they're going to be making those arguments. There's a lot of arguments that are going to be made, and this story is just not an easy one. Not an easy one.
This is where the economists come in. This is where someone's going to lay out the groundwork and say this is how much money it's costing people and how much it's not, or who's making money and who's not. That's where the economists come in. That's where that's way beyond us as the fans looking at it from the outside. And that's always gets me. People they seem to jump to conclusions based on if they hate the UFC or if they like the UFC. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you think of that. The point is, it's pretty much they are the massive power in the market, but that doesn't mean what they're doing is wrong. And about the contracts, personally, I think all MMA contracts are atrocious for the fighters. They're atrocious. But again, being atrocious contracts doesn't mean that you're going to lose this case. That's a different subject. I mean, it goes with this case, but it's a different subject. Just to say, just because the contracts are terrible, that automatically means the UFC is going to lose the case.
Yeah, the other thing I'd throw in is the role of competitors. It'll be interesting to see what they say when they get deposed, if they do any declarations. Because to all this stuff, there's a story. This is actually what I tell my students. There's a story to everything, and the story has to flow. And part of that story is if you're foreclosing your rivals should not like it, right?
Yeah.
And so it'll be interesting to see what they say when they get under oath, the types of things that come out of their mouth. They'll play an important role when it gets to that time.
Yeah, that'll be intriguing. There's a lot of stories behind the scenes, and who knows what's true or not. But there's a lot of interesting stories behind the scenes that would be great if they finally came out in the open and they're, we finally got the truth on them, or some degree of the truth, I guess. You never get the full truth. We get some measure instead of just hearing these rumors and getting some story out of it. But it'll be I'll be intrigued by that. And but again, the one thing I don't get, and this is something that. And I don't get the UFC's motion to dismiss. I mean, it makes sense that they bring up they have competition, but truth is, I think if you just look at the metrics, I don't see at the highest end that they really have any competition in the sphere. It's hard for me to see that. We can call Bellator's competition for a degree, but as much as I like what they're trying to do, I just don't. It's like saying the Omaha, Warren Buffett's Omaha team, Storm Chasers, are competing with the Minnesota Twins. It's just the degree of finances is so separate. There's such a gulf between the two. It's hard for me to say that that's true competition. But you're an economist. You could probably point holes in my argument there.
No, I'm not going to poke holes in it, but my take on that is that that's easy for people to say, right? There's a lot of competition here. No, there's no competition here. I think the way that we'll see that, now it'll take a while to get there, but the way you'll see that in the actual case is they have the ability to go and look and see, who was a free agent, who was a restricted free agent, who was negotiating contracts, who did they negotiate with, right? They have the ability to go back and get some of that information, and that's the sense in which you can try to get some information as to who was actually playing a competitive role here, right? Yeah. How many people competed for this fighters? What contracts were offered? What, contracts offered, that's evidence, but did they use anything as leverage? You can try to go back and get some of a feel for that, and that's where you get a feel for what the competition really is.
I think what's going to be interesting too, and people, it's kind of funny too, is that when I talked to Michael Lynch, who's an anti-class action lawyer, and and Harrison and some other professors about this stuff, is the Gilbert Melendez case goes both ways. It's going to be argued both sides are going to embrace Gilbert Melendez's story as evidence, because UFC is going to offer and say, look at the competition. He got this great offer and we matched it. The other side is going to say, yeah, he got a great offer, but if that's competition and he's an example of someone who can make a lot of money test the market, where are the others? And they're going to say that's a fluke case. That's a fluke that shows you how the market should work, but we're not seeing it. And that's, so both sides are going to embrace that story.
Yeah, he's a good anecdote, but he's definitely he's not a good exhibit, is the way I would put it. A good anecdote, not a good exhibit. Right? Yeah. The exhibits are all about what's sort of happening in general overall. Here, let's pull a bunch of different fighters and see what happened. But he makes for a good story, but not for a good chart in your lawsuit.
Exactly. Intriguing. Yeah, well, it'll be wrapped up in a month or two.
All right. Well, here's one thing I'll throw out before we finish this. I was talking to John while we were waiting for Jason to come on board, and I will say when we find out who the expert witnesses are, if one side has Kevin Murphy or Ben Klein, I am going to adjust my probabilities of success, perceived probability of success, towards them a lot. I'm biased towards Ben Klein because I used to work for him, but Kevin Murphy honestly is thought of as probably the best young-ish, well, he's probably 40s, 50s now, but economist in the world, especially when it comes to antitrust. And so if one of those sides gets him, you might know him from being the economist representing the NBA Players Association in their negotiating collective bargaining agreement negotiation with the NBA like 2 or 3 years ago. They brought him in and he was on TV every once in a while. But if we find out that some side has that guy or one of those two people, I think their likelihood of success goes way up. So we'll see.
If one side has both, then you're weighing heavy on that side.
yeah. It'll be funny as if to
one split them up.
Yeah, but I don't think that's going to happen. They usually have a like mind on things.
Well, they have I guess they have a like mind on who gets paid the most, so it might be based on.
Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah. So, well, that was a pretty interesting month of MMA business news there. So we got. I guess we'll have to come back. What next month? Got anything particular? Anything we should be planning for next month?
We should probably talk next month about the Rampage lawsuit.
Yes, after we look into it a little bit.
Yeah, the Rampage one. I think there was talk about just in general looking at pay-per-view numbers or something like that, possibly, right? We can maybe throw that. There was something I wanted to do. I want to crunch those numbers a little bit, and I want to look at them a different way because I didn't see where my feelings lie on pay-per-view numbers because I'm not 100% convinced yet.
And I think next week I'll have my my estimates of Zuffa out. So probably the Zuffa finances.
Oh, about time.
Yeah. Well, hey, they just came out with the new Moody's. I had to go through that. I had to add that stuff into it. It changed everything.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, I'm the type of guy that likes to put stuff out in like 2 or 3 days. John will sit on it for like 5 or 6 weeks, waiting for it to be perfect.
5 or 6 weeks. I'm talking about 5 or 6 months I've been working.
Oh, there you go.
It takes forever to collect the evidence.
All right, guys. Thanks.
All right.
So that's our show for everyone. We'll come back when there's more significant news, probably in another month or so, and talk about some of those issues and anything new that's come up, right? Because you never know what's going to pop up.